I like to be perplexed. Stories, facts, people, and situations are more interesting to me when they're fun, cute, romantic, blah 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 blah. But more importantly, when there is a complex question to be answered. A few stories, three in particular, have stuck out to me over the years for this very reason. The first is the story of a young girl named Dora. No, this Dora was not an explorer. She did not start every sentence with a riveting, "Come on, vamonos!" And she didn't have a Spanish-speaking pet monkey. This Dora is found in the charming 8-part tale of Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. We're talking about Dora Kieth, the perfect angel. Her twin brother Davy was not so angelic. One day, Davy and Dora were getting ready for Sunday school. "Don't walk in the dust," Mrs. Lynde said. By the way, if you've read the books, you've gotta love Mrs. Lynde. If you know, you know. She continues, "Don't stop on the porch to talk to the other children. Don't squirm or wriggle in your places. Don't forget the golden text. Don't lose your collection or forget to put it in. Don't whisper at prayer time, and don't forget to pay attention to the sermon." Davy deigned no response. He marched away down the lane, followed by the meek Dora. But his soul seethed within. Davy had suffered, or thought he had suffered, many things at the hands and tongue of Mrs. Rachel Lynde since she had come to Green Gables. For Mrs. Lynde could not live with anybody, whether they were 9 or 90, without trying to bring them up properly. As soon as he was out of the lane, Davy stopped and twisted his countenance into such an unearthly and terrific contortion that Dora, although she knew his gifts in that respect, was honestly alarmed lest he should never in the world be able to get it straightened out again. "Darn her!" exploded Davy. "Oh, Davy, don't swear," gasped Dora in dismay. "Darn isn't swearing, not real swearing, and I don't care if it is," retorted Davy recklessly. "Well, if you must say dreadful words, don't say them on Sunday," pleaded Dora. Davy was as yet far from repentance, but in his secret soul he felt that perhaps he had gone a little too far. There is a little taste of Dora Kieth for you, the perfect angel. The second is a tale of a certain man who had 2 sons. The younger son asked his father for some money so he could go and experience the world. He went away and wasted all he had been given on riotous living. After spending his last cent, the son found himself eating with the pigs. Sitting there silently, he remembered the food at his father's table and determined to return and receive his father's forgiveness. When his father saw his wayward son coming up the lane, he had compassion on him and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. The father brought the best robe, a ring, shoes, and the fatted calf to hold a grand party for the return of his wayward son. The father rejoiced because his son was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. But the older son was working hard in the fields when he heard music and dancing. He wondered at the cause of the celebration and was told by a servant that his younger brother had returned and the fatted calf had been killed. The elder brother was angry and would not go in. The father asked the elder son why he would not come. The son wondered after all he had done for his father why the fatted calf had not been killed for him. The father assured the elder son that all that he had also belonged to him, and entreated him to rejoice and be glad for the safe return of his younger brother. You may recognize this story, and not just because it's in the Bible. I often find myself bitterly asking the same question as the elder son. Why is it that the wayward and wicked receive the most recognition and reward? The third story you hopefully all learned in some type of philosophy or history class. It's short, but exceedingly glorified, revered, and immortalized, especially considering our limited knowledge of it. It's the story of an ancient philosopher who asked questions. Some thought he was as annoying as a gadfly, constantly biting and provoking others into thought and action. Others, including himself, thought he was the wisest man in the world, or at least in Greece. Differing views on this philosopher led him to his end. Eventually, he stood before the people of Athens on trial for corrupting the morals of the youth. He defended himself beautifully and without apology, logically proving his teaching method and philosophy. Unfortunately, and likely because he did not grovel in apology, the people of Athens decided that he should be put to death. The problem is, the execution laws in Athens aren't quite like what they are today. It wasn't looking like anyone was actually going to kill him, and with good reason. They'd make a martyr out of him. Socrates now has some options. He can run away, like his pal Crito and all his other pals want him to do. He can force the city fathers to kill him, or he can drink the hemlock, killing himself by gradually paralyzing his nervous system. Somehow, Socrates has convinced practically everyone that the third option was the most honorable. How did he manage this? Have we all been bamboozled? What is it about committing suicide, purposefully and intentionally discarding the gift of life, that makes us think this man died as a hero? There is a huge character flaw that connects these three stories, a flaw that is hard to see, and is the main cause of my perplexity. This huge character flaw also connects all of our stories. Dora Kieth continues throughout her life to scold Davy and be the perfect angel. The thing that confused me the most is that Anne, beautiful, vibrant, lovable, red-headed Anne, never liked Dora. She liked Davy way better, even though he was mischievous and conniving, while Dora was always righteous. The always righteous Dora reflects that of the ever-obedient elder son, who always did what the father asked, and yet nobody really liked him for it, and he received, in comparison to his brother, no recognition at all. On the flip side, we have Socrates, who we call a martyr, who has received mounds of recognition for an act that all Christians normally condemn. Today, unlike Socrates, we don't ever really have the need to die for things. In fact, if you call someone a martyr today, it's usually derogatory. It means that you are sacrificing unnecessarily for fake fulfillment or praise. If you see your mama slaving away in the kitchen at 2 a.m., martyr. If your friend keeps dating dirtbags because he or she can help them, martyr. If you consistently complain about the rigorous lifestyle that you consistently choose, martyr, in every negative modern sense of the word. This type of martyrdom means that you do something for recognition, praise, glory, and honor, but under the guise of being good. Under the guise of being good. This is the flaw that my three complex characters share, that we all share. Dora is annoying because she thinks she's better than everyone else. She does everything right, and she knows it. She's not necessarily righteous, she is self-righteous. While Davy is a rascal, at least he is sincere. At least when he tries to do good, he does it for the sake of being good, and not just so other people will think well of him. Dora desires greatness under the guise of being good. The elder son in the story is in this way the same. He doesn't realize that while he has done everything right, he hasn't done it for the right reasons. He lacks the greatest gift of all, repentance. Change. Exactly what his younger brother has found. And Socrates could have just as easily lived for the real truth instead of killing himself for his version of it. We can't blame them. It feels good to be recognized. It's awesome when people see how cool you really are. It feels unfair to us when someone takes credit for something we did, or when nobody noticed or appreciates a great sacrifice we made for them. The question we have to ask is, why did we do the good deed in the first place? Why did we initially make the sacrifice? Was it for the sake of being a good person, being pure in heart, helping others? Or was it because we desired the recognition, because we wanted to feel special and important? Did we do it so we could prove to other people that we are good? This snare catches us every day, whether we are boasting about how early we wake up, lording our knowledge of things over other people, or simply becoming jealous when ordinary people outshine us. The problem with desiring greatness is that there is a better option. We don't have to be trapped in this unending cycle of overblown self-sacrifice? The solution is found in a simple proverb. The book of Proverbs, actually. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without right. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without right. In other words, it's better to be good than it is to be great. It's better not because it's more attractive or because it's easier or even because it promises more, but because it's real. It doesn't promise empty praise or changing values. Being good for its own sake promises deep, abiding love and spiritual freedom, though the climb is much steeper. A young missionary from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came up to what members of the church, myself included, believed to be a modern-day apostle, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. This missionary asked him if Elder Holland would give his life for the church. Elder Holland said, "Elder, I am giving my life for the church." And then the apostle goes on to say, "I know what the missionary meant. What he meant was, would you die for it? Well, that's the easy part. That's a snap. On some days it looks really appealing. That's the easy part, to die for it. Well, what God needs is people who will live for it. People who will go the distance. People who are in this race we're talking about, that will go all the way to the tape. And some may die along the way, and that's wonderful, but he needs people who will finish the work. He needs people who will wrap this up, and that's the pledge I make to you, and that's the pledge he asked. We're in this together." These people who will go the distance that Holland talks about, I want to highlight their stories. While perhaps less perplexing, these three individuals have had an equal impact on me, and have taught me what it means to be good. The first is Blaise Pascal, inventor, scientist, mathematician, a true child prodigy. At the young age of 14, he was already attending meetings of senior French mathematicians. At 16, he had so impressed the mighty Descartes with his mathematical writings that the latter refused to believe that so young a boy was the author. At 18, Pascal invented a calculating machine that stands as the very remote predecessor of the modern computer. Further, he made significant contributions to the theory of probability, pushing the subject beyond the rudimentary knowledge of the mathematicians a century before. In spite of his obvious talent and brilliance for mathematics, he is not necessarily known for his logic and inventions. Pascal is known for his philosophy on theology, and it is his religious works that are studied even today. What's interesting to Pascal's story is that eventually he came to the conclusion that God's plan for him did not include mathematics, and he dropped the subject entirely, completely, and absolutely. The only time he ever returned to the subject was when he was 35 and experiencing a toothache. He let his thoughts wander to mathematics, and the pain disappeared. He took this as a heavenly sign and made a quick but intensive return to mathematical research. By quick and intensive, I mean barely a week. But during that week, he was able to discover the fundamental properties of the cycloid curve, which changed calculus forever. Pascal could have been a true genius of the mathematical world. He could have discovered things that remained hidden for hundreds of years. He could have helped those around him understand the order of the universe. He could have been truly great. And yet, he was humble enough to recognize a better and more meaningful path. Since his death, his writings on God and Christianity have influenced many. Pascal taught that God should be experienced through the heart, and not just through reason. In Pascal's Wager, a writing in which he implores the reader to wager on believing in God, he writes, "Now what harm will come to you from choosing this course? You will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, full of good works, a sincere, true friend. It is true you will not enjoy noxious pleasures, glory, and good living, but will you not have others? I tell you that you will gain in this life, and that every step you take along this road, you will see that your gain is so certain, and your risk is so negligible, that in the end you will realize that you have wagered on something certain and infinite, for which you have paid nothing. If my words please you and seem cogent, you must know that they come from a man who went down upon his knees before and after to pray to this infinite and indivisible being, to whom he submits his own, that he might bring your being also to submit to him for your own good and for his glory, and that strength might thus be reconciled with lowliness. Pascal knew that mathematics could bring him glory and good living, but he also knew that God was the most important thing in his life. This same lesson is demonstrated in the second tale told by a lesser-known hero, Bess Streeter Aldrich. She writes the story of Abbie Deal. Abbie has a beautiful voice. She adores the piano. She's a talented artist. In that week of October, on a Friday afternoon, Aldrich writes, when the hazel brush was as brown burnished as Abbie's hair, and the big woods a mass of scarlet and bronze and crimson, she closed the schoolhouse and left for home. When nearly home she paused, turned abruptly, and climbing the stake and rider fence, walked through some oaks into the clearing, where the October sun flecked down through leaf shadows. Not for several years had she visited the old grassy knoll between the huge trees. Half amused at her own childishness, half in earnest in her actions, there in the seclusion of the woods, she unloosed from its bindings the reddish-brown mass of her hair. She unbuttoned the top buttons of her lavender-springed delaine dress and pulled it down over the creamy whiteness of her shoulders, tucking in the edges to hold it in. Then, with her reddish-bronze hair, with its overtones of gold framing the mayflower petals of her skin, and with her warm brown eyes half closed, Abbie Mackenzie threw back her head and sang, "O the Lady of the Lea, fair and gay and young was she, beautiful exceedingly, the Lady of the Lea." A twig snapped, and the note snapped with it. Frightened, Abbie whirled to the sound. Loser Butt, Ed Matthews, stood near, his blonde face aflame. Abbie gave a startled cry, and in fright and embarrassment clutched the neck of her gown. But Ed Matthews had her in her arms, was kissing her full red lips and the creamy mayflower petals of her neck, burying his flushed face in the red bronze of her hair. Ed Matthews eventually asks Abbie to marry him. He says he will be a rich doctor in New York and that Abbie can have all the voice, piano, and painting lessons she could ever want. She could sing in concert halls and share her voice with the world. But then one May day, something changed. And quite suddenly, Aldrich writes again, she saw someone coming down the lane. Abbie stood still, her heart pounding tumultuously with the uncertainty of the figure's identity. The world was a lovely painting of sunshine, blue skies, honey locusts, bees on the blossoms, a palpitating, throbbing world of spring. Will Deal, in his blue soldier's suit, was coming toward her. She could not take her eyes from his face. He was smiling, questioningly, a little quizzically, and with something that was infinitely more tender. He slipped the knapsack from his back and held out his arms. Swiftly, lightly, Abbie went to him. "Oh, Will, don't let me do it." Abbie began sobbing a little wildly, almost hysterically. For 2 years, Abbie Mackenzie had not shed a tear, and now she was crying wildly in Will Deal's arms. Will held her close, smoothed her hair back from her creamy white forehead. "Do what, Abbie girl?" He was all gentleness, all desirous of understanding. "Marry Ed Matthews." So Abbie Mackenzie married Will Deal. After having their first child, they needed more space. So they moved to the unforgiving plains of Nebraska. Will promises Abbie that eventually she can pick up art and singing again. But each of Abbie's children grow up, and one by one, Abbie gives away her paints and singing lessons and money to each child that took an interest in her hobbies. Abbie Deal gave up everything she could have been, and wanted to be. When her small family was growing and life was tough, Aldrich writes, standing there in the soddy door, Abbie felt like two personalities. One argued bitterly that it was impossible for love to keep going when there was no hope for the future, suggested that there was no use trying to keep it going. The other said sternly that marriage was not the fulfillment of passion, marriage was the fulfillment of love. And love was sometimes pleasure and sometimes duty. Abbie, sure that love was the light you see by, went happily about her work, one baby in her arms and the other at her skirts, courage her lone star and love her guide, a song upon her lips and a lantern in her hand. And when all of her children grew up, forsook the farm, and made something of themselves at the sacrifice of their mother, Aldridge writes, far into the evening they sat around the old coal burner talking and laughing, with tears not far behind the laughter. The state legislator, the banker, the artist, the singer, and the college teacher. And in their midst, rocking and smiling, sat the little old lady who brought them up, with a song upon her lips and a lantern in her hand. Abbie received no recognition for her sacrifice. Her children never understood what she gave up for them. But that wasn't why Abbie lived the way she did. The third story I get to watch every single Christmas. Every year I'm like, ugh, I love this movie, but seriously, do we have to watch this again? But as the movie progresses, I become more and more involved, and every time by the end of the movie, I forget that Christmas really isn't Christmas without Bedford Falls. George Bailey is the main character. He lives his whole life wanting to travel the world and be an architect. But he's an old soul, and he's wise and mature beyond his years, and he knew what was right. His dad saw a need and filled it by starting a building and loan business. As young George is walking home with Mary, his dad suddenly dies. An ultimatum is reached. Either George becomes the new president of the building and loan and forfeits his college money to his younger brother Harry, or Mr. Potter, the creepiest, nastiest, most money-loving man in America, would take it over. George chooses the harder choice and takes over the building and loan, putting off his dreams. George's brother Harry comes home from college, willing to take over the building and loan, but George knows it isn't what's right. So even though it's one of the saddest things to ever happen in the entire world, George stays with the business. He and Mary eventually get hitched. Finally, George gets to travel. They have saved $2,000 for their lofty honeymoon travels. But on the way to the train station, you see many awful, terrible, no good black umbrellas. It's a run on the freaking bank. So, of course, both Mary and George willingly give up everything but $2 of their honeymoon fund so that Mr. Potter doesn't monopolize Bedford Falls with his creepiness. Soon, war breaks out. Because George is deaf in one ear, he can't serve. Harry does. He goes on to receive a Medal of Honor as a fighter pilot for saving many lives. At the climax of the movie, Uncle Billy loses $8,000. George Bailey is, understandably, hysterical. The only honorable thing he can think to do is kill himself and make it look like an accident so his family can receive life insurance. As he's about to jump off the bridge, George is given the opportunity to see what the world would be like without him. At this point in the story, I'm sitting on the couch with my Muddy Buddies and my hot chocolate. I'm frustrated, I'm concerned, I'm on the edge of my seat, and I resent the world for dealing cards out so unfairly. George did everything that he could do. For his father, for his family, for his town. He gave up everything. And what does he get in return? His bank foreclosing and imprisonment. It's such a rotten deal. Well, turns out, even though Harry's terrific feats in football and business ventures were pretty cool, Bedford Falls was not the same without George's simple, devoted acts. The story ends with my bowl of Muddy Buddies gone, and me singing along with tears in my eyes and the Christmas spirit in my heart to Auld Lang Syne with all the rest of George's friends. The purpose of my sharing these stories is to show that because of our innate sense of fair play, being good is difficult. It has to be. Many would say that Blaise Pascal abandoned a precious opportunity to be a great mathematician. I have been homeschooled pretty much my whole life. I love learning and academic achievement, but I don't like the way things are done in public schools today. More than my dislike for them, I feel that God has called me to a different path. Many of my friends have said that I am abandoning my gifts by attending a little tiny college in Murray, Utah. If I want to be someone important in the world, if I want to be great in some way, that means attending whatever college everyone else is attending and doing whatever networking everyone else is doing. So, to console myself, I am reminded of what a renowned and wise musician, T. Swizzy, once sang. Haters gonna hate. It's kind of a stretch to say that I have been persecuted, but those who are trying to be good should expect opposition. In the Sermon on the Mount, the Savior Jesus Christ delivers each saying in increasing magnitude. He ends his sermon with the most weighted statement, the greatest in magnitude, and he says, "Blessed are the persecuted for righteousness' sake, for they shall inherit the kingdom of God." If we are really listening to this scripture, we will believe that it's a blessing to be persecuted. A blessing. Because, like the elder brother in the story of the prodigal son, we have the opportunity to inherit everything our Father has. Abbie Deal shows another route of difficulty, that of consistently sacrificing your own wants and desires. She has taught me what it really means to be good. Who would you say is the greater person, Socrates or Abbie Deal? Who is greater? Certainly Socrates is far greater, but who gave a more painful sacrifice? Who better displays goodness? Wasn't it Abbie? Wasn't it her life that was dedicated to the principle of charity, to all that is good? Being good requires us to set aside some things that we might want or think are good for us, to consistently live for others and not for ourselves. And finally, George Bailey's story displays the path of receiving what seems like nothing in return. And yet, when his brother comes home, the much celebrated prodigal son, there is no resentment in George's heart. He rejoiced and was glad for the safe return of his brother, receiving nothing but the old building in loan, all that his father hath. Not only did George rejoice at the return of his brother, but in the end he chose to value his life more than his death. He could have killed himself, and by Socrates' standards, it likely would have been better for him to die and provide money to his family than to stick it out in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Instead, George had to humbly accept money from his friends, even though it was likely humiliating for him to not adequately provide for his family. George gave up everything he wanted and received virtually nothing. The path to being good is not flashy. Some may even say that it is not honorable because of its lack of recognition, honor, and praise. So, the path to being good is steep. It requires sacrifice, ridicule, and the type of reward that is unseen. After everything I've said, this might sound crazy, but there is no doubt in my mind that even though this path seems unfair, it is better. My point isn't to make a modern-day martyr out of all of us, constantly bemoaning the difficulty of being good, or to implore you to be a victim of your circumstances. My point is actually best demonstrated in a line from The Book Thief by Marcus Zukac. This book follows the story of a young girl and a Jewish man in Nazi-occupied Germany. But what makes this story interesting is that Death narrates it. At one point in the book, Death says, "Yes, I have seen a great many things in this world. I attend the greatest disasters and work for the greatest villains. But then there are other moments. These other moments are what make up life. They are, as Gandalf described, small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love. These are the moments where Abbie Deal is laughing with her grown-up kids by the fire, setting out to work with children at her skirts, or crying in Will's arms. These are the moments when every single one of George's friends hears he's in trouble. They immediately come running to save him from his financial straits, because they all remember every time George reached out to them and selflessly saved them. I have these moments when I take a walk in the lovely rain, find answers to a question I have had for years, or I'm so filled with love for others it feels like I might burst. These are moments of joy, sorrow, and purpose. They are more full than moments of greatness ever will be. As Pascal has said, now what harm will come to you from choosing this course? You will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, full of good works, a sincere, true friend. It is true you will not enjoy noxious pleasures, glory, and good living. But will you not have others? I tell you that you will gain even in this life, and that at every step you take along this road, you will see that your gain is so certain and your risk is so negligible that in the end you will realize that you have wagered on something certain and infinite, for which you have paid nothing. At the end of this life, it's the moments of stress and worry over how great we are that we will actually have to pay for. There is one more argument I must address before I close. Sometimes being good can appear dishonorable and weak, because honor has a lot to do with what others think about you. History is riddled with individuals that lose and regain honor through an intricate process defined by contemporary culture, like dueling, samurai warrior code, and today, cancel culture. Having honor and being well respected is not wrong. I'm not advocating for weakness or cowardice. But today, I don't think Gen Zs and millennials lack courage. We are the hero generation. We are producing political activists left and right. While people are probably becoming less principled, they're becoming more adamant and outspoken about their lack of principles. What we lack today is not courage, but clarity. We call good evil and evil good. There's nothing wrong with Dora wanting to be righteous, nothing wrong with the older son trying his best to help his father, and there's nothing wrong with being willing to die for what is true. But we must be courageous for the right reasons. We need clarity to know what is truly good, to know what those right reasons are. This clarity enables us to see past Dora's outward piousness to her self-righteousness. The older brother's desires are revealed as selfish when he refuses to welcome his older brother home. With Socrates, there is a difference for dying for the truth and killing yourself for it. Reckless courage does not make strong individuals. It makes French revolutionaries and radical feminists. There are always empty reasons to be great instead of good. But clarity will allow us to realize, as Pascal realized when he fell upon his knees and submitted to God, that strength might thus be reconciled with lowliness. True courage, true strength, is submitting to a power greater than our own. This clarity will give us the ability to stand up when we need to stand up, but also to stand down in meekness when we need to stand down. Armed with this knowledge of right and wrong, we can have true strength and courage in loneliness, which is the most honorable thing, even when the world may say otherwise. So, come on, vamonos. Everybody, let's go. Let's listen to the beautiful words of Rudyard Kipling as he encapsulated this idea of goodness in his masterful poem titled If. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about don't deal in lies, or being hated don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. You can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it in one turn of pitch and toss, and lose, and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. I am prepared. not to die a death of glory, honor, and recognition, but to live a life of endless little moments, moments of color, family, life, songs, and interesting people. And while I expect to experience struggle, solitude, and sorrow, I will, as Pascal said, have wagered on something certain and infinite for which I have paid nothing. I want to be good for its own sake. I am prepared to climb this steep hill, to live this life. Are you?